Hey everyone, I apologize for just doing a video recording and not a PowerPoint to go along with it. I am very bad at technology and don't know how to do those at the same time, so rather I'm just going to explain in this video about my topic. So mine is comparing the hunger strikes in Northern Ireland during the Troubles to the hunger strikes of the suffragette movement in the United States. And so during the 1970s and 1980s, hunger strikes were used as a form of protest by Irish Republican prisoners during the Troubles. And the Irish Republicans are those who advocate for Northern Ireland just to be united with Ireland and no longer remain part of the United Kingdom and consist of mostly Catholics, as we know. And in the 1910s, the United States suffragette movement was at its height. Just like in Northern Ireland, different groups responded in various ways to the state of their society. For example, the suffragette movement consisted of mainly two groups: the National Women's Suffrage Association, led by Susan B. Anthony, and the National Women's Party, led by Alice Paul. The National Women's Suffrage Association was more conservative and used peaceful tactics such as lobbying to get their point across. However, the National Women's Party were inspired by the suffragette movement in the United Kingdom to use militant tactics. Although occurring in different countries and times, these two events share many commonalities. Both events were used to protest discrimination during the 20th century, and both groups were being threatened to their national securities through their campaigns. However, the outcomes of these processes differed by nations. Despite the similarities between these two groups, the movement in Northern Ireland captured public imagination and garnered a huge increase in support. While in the US, this tactic of a hunger strike did not help capture the movement in the public eye and did not help galvanize the community. First, both cases arose due to discrimination within the two countries to respond to the inequality and oppression that these communities faced. The discrimination fueled the use of hunger strikes as a tactic within both groups. The suffragette movement began at the Seneca Falls Convention, the first convention for women's rights in the United States, held in Seneca Falls, New York, in 1848. However, due to the American Civil War, Reconstruction era, and the Gilded Age, the suffragette movement didn't take off until the late 19th and early 20th centuries. In Northern Ireland, the trouble started in 1968 after the government of Northern Ireland dissolved. Irish Republicans were advocating against direct rule, in which the United Kingdom ruled over, and still rules over Northern Ireland until after the Good Friday Agreement was signed on May 22, 1998. In the late 1970s, both the Labour government and the Conservative opposition appeared disposed to look favorably upon extending direct rule indefinitely, while amending its mode of operation and increasing some of the responsibilities in government, which was set in the rating by Aughey on page 87. The polarization between Catholics and Protestants, which eventually led to competing nationalist movements, whereas there was a polarization between men and women. Although there were male suffragists and female anti-suffragists, most of the fight was men against women. This reflected the rhetoric of radical suffragettes such as Alice Paul, Lucy Burns, Inez Milholland, Ida B. Wells, etc. Sorry, I'm going to take a short little sip of water. This essay is very long. Okay. They argued for militant tactics to push the suffragette movement forward, such as protesting in the streets. However, these protests caused for the suffragettes to be arrested on charges of civil disturbance and picketing a wartime president, who at the time was Woodrow Wilson, who served during World War I. When their special category status was removed, barring them from being presented as political prisoners, they refused to wear prison clothes and participated in hunger strikes. Both groups were a threat to national security. The Irish Republican Army specifically was threatening British national security through their campaign because they used violent tactics. In December of 1969, at the start of the Troubles, the Provisional Irish Republican Army arose from those widespread religious violence that wrecked the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. The PRARA became the most dangerous paramilitary group during the Troubles. By the time the Troubles ended in the late 1990s, the Provisional Irish Republican Army had killed more than 1,800 people, around half the victims of the entire conflict. The role of defending Catholics in Northern Ireland had been played by the Irish Republican Army. Back in the 1920s, when Ireland became independent of Great Britain on December 6, 1921, with the signing of the Anglo-Irish Treaty, it was the Irish Republican Army who fought for their independence. In 1971, Catholic men were getting arrested without being charged for any crimes. These steps drove Catholics into the armed into the arms of the Provisional Irish Republican Army. After Bloody Sunday, which occurred on January 30th, 1972, the Provisional Irish Republican Army had such a strong level of support from the Catholic people that the conflict of the Troubles would not be resolved without their work. Meanwhile, suffragettes were also seen as threatening to national security within the U.S., but rather because their campaign occurred during World War I. 10 suffragettes, including Alice Paul, were arrested on August 28, 1917, for picketing outside the White House for a wartime president. World War I began on June 28, 1914, but the U.S. didn't enter World War I until April 6, 1917. Their goal was to pressure Woodrow Wilson to support the proposed Anthony Amendment to the Constitution that would allow women the right to vote. Between June and November of 1917, 218 protesters from 26 states were arrested and charged with obstructing sidewalk traffic, even though the real cause was for disturbing the political agenda of World War I. Once arrested, Alice Paul employed the hunger strike tactic at the Occoquan Workhouse in Lorton, Virginia. Other suffragettes were going to the District of Columbia jail. Alice Paul resorted to this hunger strike method not only once, but twice. When she was forcibly fed, she was taken from her bed, carried to another room, forced into a chair, bound with sheets, and sat upon by a prison guard. The prison director, assisted by 2 female attendants, placed a rubber tube up her nostrils without any anesthesia and was pumped liquid through her stomach twice a day for a month, from November 1st to December 1st. One of the main differences for the hunger strikes in Northern Ireland during the Troubles versus the hunger strikes in the United States of America during... Oh my gosh, my computer is not working very well. Sorry about that. Okay, let's see where I was here. Okay. One of the main differences for the hunger strikes in Northern Ireland during the Troubles versus the hunger strikes in the United States of America during the suffragette movement was that hunger strikes were a familiar protest strategy and have been used for years in Northern Ireland. This tactic has been used by the Irish Republican nationalists prior to the independence of Northern Ireland from Great Britain in 1921. In pre-Christian Ireland, men with grievances against one another would park on each other's doorsteps and fast until the dispute was resolved. For Dr. Ronna Fields, a psychologist in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, the purpose of the act of the hunger strike is to shame one's opponent. After all, having a man who's starving at your doorstep isn't a good image for anyone. Even fasts in religions are often used to repent, such as Yom Kippur at Judaism. Fasts are rather a statement of public grievance. Fasts are rather a statement of public grievance in Ireland. During the Easter Rising of 1916, until Ireland became a free state in 1921, the hunger strikes were intensified and became enshrined in the Irish Republican tactics. In 1920, 89 men were arrested at Dublin's Mountjoy prison for going against British rule and undertook a hunger strike that lasted 18 days to back demands for the keeping of their special political prisoner status and their release from jail. Terence MacSweeney, the elected mayor of Cork, Ireland, was arrested at a town hall in 1920 and began a hunger strike to protest British interference with elected local officials. He continued this after being transferred to Brixton Prison in London. However, in the United States of America, hunger strikes were not a familiar protest strategy. In fact, the United States of America took inspiration for Great Britain during the suffragette movement, which lasted until 1918, when women finally gained the right to vote in parliamentary elections. Since hunger strikes were a familiar tactic, the British suffragettes used it in their movement for earning the right to vote. The suffragette movement was one of the first times a hunger strike was used as a tactic. New protesters would step outside the place of women who were arrested. In these prisons, due to the removal of special category status as political prisoners, women were beaten, kicked, chained to cell bars, choked, locked in rat-infested cells, and were provided with only rotten food that was infested with worms. They were permitted no visitors, nor consultations with their lawyers, even though the Sixth Amendment, which was ratified in 1791 as part of the United States of America Bill of Rights, declares the right to legal counsel. Protesting these conditions, Alice Paul initiated a hunger strike. Alice Paul said that the harsher they could make the administration seem, the better. News of the self-sacrifice of these women embarrassed Woodrow Wilson. The fact is that it was World War I only increased the sense of momentum among the suffragettes. In Northern Ireland, the hunger strikes captured public imagination and garnered a huge increase in support. This was especially due to the death of Bobby Sands, the leader of the Irish Republican Army, who passed away on May 5, 1981 at just 27 years old in Maze prison outside Belfast after starving himself to death as part of the hunger strike. Journalist Peter Taylor covered the story at the time, stating that it marked a watershed in the troubles in Northern Ireland, helping to pave way for the main political wing of the Irish Republican Army, Sinn Féin, which was founded on November 28, 1905. Today, Sinn Féin is the largest political party in Ireland. Bobby Sands died a month after being elected and was on hunger strike for 66 days. Over 100,000 people came to his funeral, exceeding governmental expectations after previously believing that the hunger strike had only limited support. Over the next 3 months, 9 other hunger strikers were honored by the Irish Republican Army. Many of them had also gone without food for over 60 days. Irish Republican prisoners were still joining the hunger strike well into autumn of 1981. Many people only ended their hunger strikes when it became clear that their families would otherwise allow for medical intervention to save the lives of their sons. Meanwhile, the hunger strikes of the suffragette movement did not help capture public movement or galvanize the community. Unlike in Northern Ireland, nobody died from the hunger strikes in the United States of America since they were force-fed in prison. Many believed that women should not sully themselves with politics, rather that they should serve as the homemakers of society. Many suffragettes, such as Alice Paul, were never married. Even Edith Wilson, Woodrow Wilson's second wife, believed that a woman's place was not at the ballot box. Therefore, the suffragettes participating in a hunger strike while in prison only angered most people, for they were being foolish. Another difference between the hunger strikes in Northern Ireland and the hunger strikes in the United States of America was the media portrayal. By the time the hunger strikes had occurred in Northern Ireland, there was already a widespread use of television. British press viewed the Irish Republican prisoners as terrorists, which further angered the community, only galvanizing them more. The hunger strikes in Northern Ireland were covered by popular British newspapers such as The Sun and The Guardian, making people all over Great Britain aware of the situation. People all over the world, whether it was in the United States or the Soviet Union, commended the British government for allowing a member of their parliament to starve himself to death whilst representing his own nation. While the British press dismissed this international concern because of the IRA propaganda, these opinions regarding the British government were not going anywhere. At this stage, people had, as Dowdy quotes, as Rosia Dowdy, an inflamed, uniformed international opinion against Britain. The more British spoke out against their prisoners, the more the Irish Republican Army gained support. Meanwhile, suffragettes had a much different treatment in the media. Back in the 1910s, there was no radio or television. Therefore, newspapers and magazines were the best depiction of the media. The media was also infiltrated with patriarchal influence, as most women at the time were homemakers and didn't have any jobs within the media. Life magazine depicted suffragettes as violent and negligent towards others, especially the National Women's Party, which was founded on June 5, 1916, by Alice Paul and Lucy Burns. As previously stated, they were known for their militant tactics compared to the more conservative approach of the National Women's Association, founded on May 15, 1869, by Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucretia Mott. One image in the magazine even depicted suffragettes stabbing men with their umbrellas, a common article of fashion in the 1910s, even if it was not raining outside. Rather, it was used to protect women from the sun before the invention of sunscreen in 1938. Suffragettes, especially since most of them were unmarried, were depicted as unattractive, unfeminine, neglectful of their families and husbands, if they had any, and or not capable of marrying. Males in the media were always portrayed as innocent against the violent women. One last main difference in the hunger strikes and the suffragette movement versus the hunger strikes in Northern Ireland was the contrast in gender. The Northern Ireland hunger strikes consisted of mainly men. During the Troubles, women who were arrested during protests would spill their menstrual blood on the walls of their prison cells, but more of a sense of solidarity for the male hunger strikers. Contrary to popular belief, women were involved in the Irish Republican Army during the Troubles. Dolores Price joined the Provisional Irish Republican Army along with her sister, Marion Price, in the 1970s. However, women were not seen to have participated in hunger strikes in a large capacity. If they did, it was surely not depicted by the media. Meanwhile, it was only women who participated in the hunger strikes during the suffragette movement. Yes, there were men who were in support of the suffragette movement. After all, the 19th Amendment was ratified by the United States Congress, which required many male congressmen to vote in support of women's rights. However, none of them participated in the suffragette protests, and none of them were arrested and participated in hunger strikes. In fact, men were rarely involved in the hunger strikes as it was. The suffragettes were sent to all-female prisons, which had mainly female prison workers who participated in the forced feeding of the suffragettes. This caused the suffragettes to feel isolated due to the lack of support. Both the hunger strikes in Northern Ireland and the United States of America are huge moments in history for both nations. It was the work of both the National Women's Party and the National Suffrage Association that women obtained their right to vote. Without the hunger strikes of the Troubles, the Good Friday Agreement may never have been signed. Granted, nobody wants to hear of a hunger strike. Nobody should ever have to starve themselves just to stick up for what they believe in. However, like it or not, hunger strikes are a powerful tactic within protesting.